She stepped into the dark, alone. No one saw her leave her corner, not even the boy curled beneath her coat, sound asleep on a floor of broken tile and stained blankets. She moved like breath, slow, unnoticed, gone before the others could lift their heads and ask where. The soldier waited at the far end of the hall, back against the wall, cigarette glowing like a single red eye, his boots scuffed, his fingers tapping a beat that didn't belong to any music. He didn't smile, just nodded. She didn't speak, not even when the steel door creaked open and swallowed her. The room smelled of rust and bleach, a folding cot, a basin of water, a sack of bread left neatly on the table, already wrapped in cloth, as if he didn't want to see her touch it after. She stood beside the cot, didn't sit, didn't cry. Instead, she unbuttoned her coat, folded it, placed it on the chair, and in that moment, she wasn't a mother, she wasn't a person, she was just hunger wearing skin. He didn't ask her name, she didn't offer it. It didn't take long. There was no violence, no cruelty, just silence. He finished first, pulled away, adjusted his belt. She dressed slowly, like someone walking backward through shame. Her legs shook, but she didn't let herself stumble. The soldier tossed the bundle of bread onto the bed without looking at her. She took it, cradled it, almost reverently, then turned, walked back out the door. No words exchanged, no eye contact, only a single breath from the soldier as she passed, a sound like a man realizing she was younger than he thought. She returned to the shelter without a sound. Others stirred in their sleep, but no one rose. The concrete swallowed her footsteps. Her child lay exactly where she left him, facing the wall, one hand curled beneath his chin. She sat down beside him, unwrapped the bread carefully, broke it into pieces. Some stale, some fresh, one slice still warm. She placed a piece in his hand, then another and another. He stirred, eyes half-lidded, smiled. "Where did it come from?" he asked, voice hoarse. She paused, then smiled too. "From the sky," she whispered, "while you were sleeping." You can judge her. You can say she sold herself, say she failed, say no mother should do what she did. You can shout that she gave away what no one should ever have to give. But before you write her name in disgust, listen. Before that piece of bread, there was a boy who hadn't eaten in 2 days, a mother who hadn't eaten in 4, a shelter full of eyes that saw everything and said nothing, and a world that taught her, if you want your child to live, you may have to disappear inside your own skin. "I know you won't forgive me," she once wrote. "I don't forgive me either." So ask yourself, would you have done any different? If your child opened his eyes and asked for food, would you have found a better way? Or would you have done exactly what she did? Only prayed no one ever found out? Before hunger had a face, she was Elia, not the girl in the corner, not the one with the sick boy, not her, spoken in whispers from mouths too proud to beg. Just Elia. She lived in a quiet town with stone houses and a garden that never quite behaved. The soil was poor, but her son, Arlen, loved digging in it anyway, especially for the crooked little pears that never ripened all the way. He called them stars, said they looked like the ones from bedtime stories, just misshapen enough to be magic. Aaliyah had laughed when he said that. She remembered the exact sound, bright, unburdened, from a time when she still laughed without apology. She hadn't made that sound in a long time. Back then, the world still had color. Mornings came with the scent of wet grass and dry bread. The radio worked. People still nodded at each other on the street. The market still opened, crates of onions, glass jars of honey, cracked eggshells still warm from the hen. She sold soap. Nothing fancy, just ash, fat, and lavender from her mother's old garden. They called her the clean girl. She didn't mind. Her hands always smelled like herbs. Her son always smelled like sleep and dirt. And somehow, that had been enough. Until the shelves emptied. At first, no one panicked. They said it was temporary, a supply route issue, a border thing. Then came the ration slips, then the military checkpoints, then the silence. The radio went to static, the market shut down, and the air changed. People stopped smiling, children stopped running in the streets, and Elia started counting. Bread, water, time. She rationed everything except love. That she gave without measure, until the nights grew longer and Arlen's ribs began to show. Then came the decision she never thought she'd have to make. To leave, to carry what she could, to walk north, to find shelter. They left behind the garden, the bent pear tree, the chipped teacup on the windowsill. She didn't even take a picture, because she believed, somehow, they'd be back. They weren't the only ones. She saw them on the road, mothers with sacks, children with string-tied shoes, men who no longer spoke. Every hour brought someone new, someone thinner, someone more afraid. The world was shedding people like leaves, and the ones who fell first were the softest. She carried Arlen in a sling the first day. By the third, her arms gave out. He walked behind her, holding the hem of her coat. She kept telling him stories, anything to distract him from the growl in his belly. Once there was a prince who lived in a pantry. He laughed. That laugh, it stayed with her longer than anything else. They arrived at the shelter just before the gates closed. A decommissioned train station, iron doors welded shut, concrete halls carved into the hillside. The guard didn't ask her name, just looked at her boots, her son's face, her empty hands. He let her in. She thought that was the worst it would get. She hadn't yet learned that surviving was something you had to pay for. The shelter didn't feel like a place built to keep people safe. It felt like a place built to make them forget they existed. The walls were thick concrete, windowless, sweating from within. The air carried the sour weight of too many breaths and too few hopes. Everything echoed, but only slightly, just enough to remind you that you weren't alone, but also that no one would come if you screamed. There were rules, not posted, but understood. Don't take more than your ration. Don't speak too loudly. Don't ask for warmth. And if you didn't have anything to offer, don't expect anything in return. Elia found a corner beneath a broken light fixture. The bulb flickered at random intervals, casting long, fractured shadows against the wall. She laid out their things, 2 blankets, a tin cup, 1 threadbare sweater she gave to Arlen without discussion. She curled around him at night, her body becoming the last soft thing in a world that had turned to iron. She counted his breaths. They came shallow, uneven. His fever had returned. There was no medicine here, just rumors of it. One man claimed he'd seen an emergency clinic 2 towns over, looted within hours. Another said the soldiers still kept antibiotics for their own. A girl whispered that once. Someone got clean water from the medical wing, but paid a price that left her staring at walls for days. Elia listened and stayed silent. She still believed, then, that silence was a kind of dignity. Rations came twice a day. If you were on the list, they handed out bread hardened like stone, water that smelled faintly of mold, and sometimes, a miracle, soup. But Elia wasn't on the list. Neither was Arlen. She had arrived too late, with nothing to trade, no family name, no army papers, no canned food hidden in her coat lining. So she waited. She waited near the queue each time, not close enough to be told to move, but near enough that sometimes, just sometimes, someone gave her a crust they couldn't finish. She gave every crumb to Arlen. He never questioned it, just ate slowly, gratefully, his lips dry, his eyes always searching hers for reassurance. She kept smiling, even when her own stomach twisted like wire. At night, the whispers began. Not stories, not dreams, deals. You could hear them echoing behind metal doors. What will you give me for bread? Only one night. She needs warmth, just warmth. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't touch my sister. Elia pressed her hands against Arlen's ears and hummed. She didn't judge them, not anymore. She just didn't want his dreams to change. One morning, she found blood on his lips. A thin red crack from coughing too hard. He smiled anyway. It tickles now, Mama, he said. She turned away before he saw her eyes. She wasn't crying. Not yet. Just deciding. Later that night, she approached one of the guards. Not the cruelest one, not the kindest either. She didn't say what she wanted. She just said, "Please." He looked her up and down, not like a person, like weight, like inventory. "What do you have to trade?" he asked. She hesitated. Her voice caught like cloth and teeth. Then, slowly, she placed her hands on the edge of his belt. He didn't smile, just nodded toward the service hall behind the generator room. 10 minutes, he said. She didn't answer. She just followed him, not for herself, but because her child was still breathing, and she couldn't bear the thought of watching him stop. The service hallway reeked of oil and old smoke. No one came back here unless they had to, unless they were cleaning pipes or hiding something. The buzzing of the generator masked most sounds, but not all, not the ones that mattered. The guard walked ahead of her, his boots loud against the metal floor. Aaliyah walked slower. Each step felt borrowed, not hers, like she was drifting inside someone else's skin. At the end of the hallway was a door, no lock, just a rusted handle. He opened it, motioned for her to enter. She did. The room was small, windowless. A storage closet turned into something else. A cot with no blanket. A table with a tin plate already laid out. One square of bread, a small chunk of salted meat, and a cup of boiled water. She stared at it, not for long, just long enough to know it was real. He stepped in behind her, closed the door. The silence that followed was not consent. It wasn't resistance either. It was survival. She didn't make a sound. Not when he touched her. Not when he grunted and pulled at her clothes. Not when her head hit the wall a little too hard. She stared past him, at the pipe running along the ceiling, at the flickering light overhead, at the tiny flecks of paint peeling from the metal wall like snow from a forgotten sky. And when it was over, she didn't move right away, just pulled her clothes back on, carefully, as if the act of getting dressed could stitch her back together. The guard didn't look at her, just wiped his hands, picked up the tin plate, handed it to her. He didn't say thank you. She didn't say goodbye. She returned to the main chamber with the plate hidden beneath her coat. No one looked, or maybe they did, but not one person dared meet her eyes. She found Arlen asleep, knees curled to his chest, forehead damp with fever. She knelt, set the food down, broke the bread into small pieces, placed the meat between them, warmed the water by cupping it in her hands before handing it to him. He stirred, blinked. "Mama?" "Shh," she whispered. "Eat first." He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, as she placed the bread in his palm. He smiled. It was the first full smile she'd seen in weeks. "Where did it come from?" he asked. She lied gently. "Someone left it near the door. Maybe the trucks came." He chewed slowly, carefully, his little jaw working, crumbs falling onto the blanket. He looked stronger already, his eyes clearer, his breath steadier. She didn't eat, didn't take a single bite, just watched. And when he finished, he leaned into her lap, pressing his cheek to her thigh. She stroked his hair, said nothing, because if she spoke, it might shatter everything. That night, she washed her hands until the skin flaked. Not for cleanliness, for forgetting. The water was cold, no soap, just her nails scraping at invisible stains. She scrubbed until Mira, the old woman across the hall, reached out and stopped her. "You don't have to explain," the woman said. Aaliyah didn't look at her. "I wasn't going to," she replied. The next morning, Arlen's cough eased. He stood without stumbling. He asked if they could play the string game with their fingers again. She smiled and said yes, because this is what survival looked like now. One meal at a time, one compromise at a time, one lie at a time. And in the middle of it all, the only thing she could still give completely was every crumb she didn't eat. The next days blurred, not from pain, but from the strange stillness that followed it, as if the act had swallowed time itself and replaced it with a numb, gray fog. Aaliyah moved through the shelter like steam, present, but barely noticed. A breath, a shadow, a shape curled around a child. Arlen got better. Bit by bit, he coughed less. He stood straighter. He started humming again, tuneless. Happy nonsense that made the younger children nearby smile without knowing why. He didn't ask where the bread kept coming from. Aaliyah didn't tell him. She just continued what had begun. Quiet trades, silent walks down dark halls, and one warm meal each night delivered with shaking hands. She gave away more than her body. She gave away her appetite. The hunger didn't go away. It just changed, became background noise, a constant throb behind her ribs, a buzzing in her limbs. She stopped expecting to feel full. Her body thinned, her face hollowed, but Arlen smiled. He smiled every morning when he woke to another crust, another mouthful of warmth. He smiled when she tied his shoes with fingers that trembled. He smiled when she told stories about the garden they'd left behind, how the pears fell too early and the bees were always confused. He smiled because he was fed, and in the corners of his innocence, she could still pretend she hadn't been erased. People began to notice, not what she did, but what she didn't eat. A woman with a torn sweater asked, "How does he stay so strong?" Aaliyah shrugged. "He's lucky." A man missing 3 fingers offered her a portion of his own ration. "You need to keep strength too," he said. She declined, smiling softly. He needs it more. No one pushed, no one asked, but in their silence, she could feel something settle. Respect? Pity? Maybe just the grim recognition of someone who'd made a choice the rest of them feared they'd one day have to make. There were others, other mothers, other girls. She saw them step into shadows, faces downcast, coats clutched tightly at the edges. Sometimes they returned with a bruise, sometimes they returned with nothing, and sometimes they didn't return at all. The guards never spoke of it, No one did. But it was in the air. Survival had a price, and everyone paid it differently. One evening, after Arlen had eaten and fallen asleep in her lap, Aaliyah looked down at her hands. They were thinner now, the lines more visible, the scars from before the war deeper than she remembered, and under her fingernails, a faint red smear she hadn't noticed before. Blood, oil, shame, she didn't know. All she knew was that her hands no longer felt like hers. Later, when she lay down beside Arlen and wrapped his small body in the last clean blanket they had, she closed her eyes and whispered, "You don't know what I've become, and I pray you never will." Because love, in this place, wasn't about staying pure. It was about feeding someone else, even when you were starving. It was about becoming invisible so your child didn't have to. It was about dying slowly, without making a sound. And she was still willing to do it, one crumb at a time. Some nights, the shelter hummed with secrets, not the kind that whispered from mouths, but the kind that seeped from the walls, pressed in by regret, by hunger, by the quiet tally of what had been traded and what had been lost. Aaliyah stayed in her corner, arms curled around Arlen, who by now had begun to sleep without trembling. He no longer whimpered in his dreams, no longer woke asking for water. He just breathed, soft, steady, and that, more than food, was what Aaliyah had been starving for. She didn't go to the soldier's door every night. Some nights, she couldn't. Her legs wouldn't carry her. Her skin ached from cold or memory or both. Some nights, she simply couldn't make herself go back. And on those nights, she lied. She took Arlen's portion and split it into even smaller bites. "Not hungry tonight," she'd say, tucking it into his hands. "Too tired." He always believed her, because children, especially kind ones, don't know how to question the hands that keep them alive. The others watched. They didn't speak, but they knew. The knowing sat in the air, thick as mildew. It clung to her clothes, laced her footsteps. No one accused her. No one praised her either, because the unspoken law of the shelter was this: if someone finds a way to survive, you don't ask what they gave up. You just hope you never have to do the same. But not everyone followed that law. One day, a woman, young, bitter, with a red mark on her cheekbone, approached Aaliyah as she was wringing out their water cloth near the washing basin. "I saw you," the woman said. Aaliyah didn't look up. "You think you're better than us, don't you? Because you smile while you do it? Because you pretend you're still clean?" Aaliyah squeezed the cloth harder. Water dripped down her wrists. "I'm not pretending," she said softly. The woman laughed, but there was no cruelty in it, only exhaustion, only recognition. "Then you're better at lying than I am." She walked away. Neither of them spoke about it again. That night, Aaliyah took Arlen to the story wall. It was nothing more than a patch of cracked concrete where someone had etched pictures long ago. Animals, birds, a crooked sun. Children still came here. They sat in silence, tracing their fingers over the drawings, as if memory could be transferred through stone. Aaliyah placed Arlen's hand on the drawing of the bird. "Do you remember what this one's called?" she asked. He frowned, thinking. "Robin? Close. Sparrow. Right, like the song?" She nodded. "Sparrows don't fly alone." He looked at her, brow furrowed. "Do they always come back?" She hesitated, then lied. "Always." Later, back at their corner, he fell asleep with the words still on his lips. "Sparrow." It broke her more than anything the soldier had done. Because even in this hollow world, Arlen still carried belief, still thought the world had rules, still trusted her to keep him safe. And maybe he was right. Maybe safety wasn't about perfection. Maybe it was just about giving what you had, night after night, even if it meant leaving pieces of yourself behind in every room, in every trade, in every silence. She curled beside him, watched his chest rise and fall, and whispered into the dark, not for anyone to hear, "I'll break again tomorrow, if it means you don't have to." By the second month, Aaliyah stopped feeling hungry. Not because her body no longer needed food, because her body had learned not to ask. Hunger had become something else now, a rhythm, a background noise, something quieter than the scraping of tin bowls on concrete, softer than her own breath in the dark. She still made the trades, still stepped into the shadows, still returned with warmth wrapped in a thin cloth, placed into Arlen's hands before the steam even had time to rise. But something inside her had shifted. She no longer felt ashamed. She no longer felt anything. One morning, Mira, the older woman across the hall, watched Aaliyah with strange eyes. "You're disappearing," she said. Aaliyah glanced down at her own frame, the skin across her knuckles, the way her sweater, once tight, now hung off her shoulders. "I'm fine," she said. "No," Mira replied. "You're starving on the inside." Aaliyah didn't argue. There was no point, because Mira didn't mean food, and Aaliyah didn't have the language to explain what else she'd lost. Arlen's cheeks were round again. He laughed when she braided his hair. He asked her to tell him the story about the bees in the pear tree at least once a day. He had started making little toys out of thread and paper scraps, tiny things, delicate things, a boat, a man, a bird. "Look," he said one night, holding up his latest, a tiny woman with black thread hair. "That's you." Aaliyah smiled. It nearly broke her, because even his pretend version of her still had hands, still stood upright, still looked like someone whole. She stopped looking in reflective surfaces. Too many bones, too many hollows. Her eyes no longer looked like hers. They looked like someone who had given up asking to be seen. And she didn't need to be seen. She just needed him to live. That was enough. There was a boy in the shelter, older than Arlen, maybe 13, who started watching her, not like the soldier had, but with curiosity, with confusion. One day, as she walked past him, he whispered, "Why don't you eat?" She didn't stop walking, didn't look at him, but later that night, she left a small piece of bread near his cot. Just a crust. She didn't have much more. He found it, picked it up, didn't say anything. But the next day, he sat closer to Arlen during story time. The day after that, he gave Arlen his own spoon when theirs broke. Aaliyah said nothing, but she noticed. She always noticed. One evening, she woke to find Arlen sitting up beside her, watching her with wide eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked, brushing hair from his face. He hesitated. "Did someone hurt you?" Her chest tightened. "No," she said quickly. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you cry in your sleep," he whispered. She looked away. His hands reached for hers, small, warm, honest. "I'm sorry," he said. "You don't have to cry. I'll be strong." She wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that it never had been, that she would carry every bruise, every silence, every empty space in her body 1,000 times over if it meant he never had to. But all she could say was, "You already are." Later, after he'd fallen asleep again, she held the little paper doll he'd made. The one that looked like her. She traced the edges, the drawn-on smile, the folded arms. Then she tucked it inside the lining of her coat, close to her chest, close to the parts of her that still felt like they belonged to her and her alone. And in the dark, she whispered, "You're not the only one who knows how to pretend." It happened on a night colder than the others. Colder not because the temperature had dropped, but because something in the air had shifted, like the shelter itself had begun to give up. The generator groaned, the lights flickered. No one spoke above a whisper anymore. Aaliyah sat curled around Arlen, his breath warm against her chest. He was sleeping deeper now. His cough had faded. His skin no longer burned with fever. But something else had taken its place. A quiet stillness, a softness in his limbs that scared her more than sickness. She laid a hand on his forehead. Cool. Too cool. There was no medicine, no extra blankets, no heat. Only the soldier, one of the new ones, who passed through the corridor late at night. The weight of a food sack slung over his shoulder. He didn't look cruel. He didn't look kind. He just looked tired. She rose, quietly, so Arlen wouldn't stir. Her steps echoed faintly as she followed the soldier down the hall. He noticed her at the turn near the boiler room, paused, looked her over, said nothing. She didn't speak either, just waited. She had no pride left to bargain with, no words left to trade. Only the ache in her arms where Arlen had been. Only the knowledge that if she waited for kindness, her son might not wake the next day. He stepped aside, opened the boiler door, gestured. She went in. This one was different. No cot, no quiet, just the hum of the machines and a patch of cloth on the ground. It smelled of ash and oil. He didn't undress her, didn't touch her gently, didn't look at her face once. It wasn't rough, exactly, but it wasn't human either. She stared at the wall the whole time, where someone had scratched tally marks into the stone. 63, 64, 65. She wondered if she was the next mark. When it was over, he left the bread on the floor, wrapped in foil, still warm. She sat there for a moment, breathing, then gathered it, pressed it to her chest, and returned to Arlen. He hadn't moved. She lifted him gently, propped his head in her lap, and pressed the warm bread to his lips. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "eat something, please." He stirred, opened his eyes just a little. "Mama," he murmured, "I'm here." He blinked at the bread. Where did it come from? She hesitated, then smiled. "Someone left it at the door, for us." He nodded, closed his eyes again, bit slowly, carefully, chewed without a sound. She watched every bite, not because she doubted him, but because it was the only proof she had that what she did mattered, that it worked, that he was still here. When he was done, she wiped the crumbs from his chin. He whispered, "Thank you." And in that moment, she wanted to vanish. Because what do you say to a child who thanks you for something you bled to give? You say nothing. You hold him. You pretend the world is not what it is. And you let yourself believe, just for a few minutes, that bread can be holy, even when it comes wrapped in silence and shame. She curled around him again. And as he drifted back into sleep, she whispered, "One more night," then closed her eyes, knowing tomorrow she would do it again. If the bread was there, if the soldier was waiting, if her body could still carry what love demanded of it. The next morning, the bread was gone. Not the piece she gave Arlen, the others. The hoarded crusts, the saved bites, the carefully wrapped rations she had tucked into the corner of their blanket pile, hidden behind a cracked brick. Gone. Someone had taken them. There were no signs of struggle, no broken glass, just absence. She stared at the empty space for a long time. Not angry, not afraid, just hollow. She had worked for those crumbs, traded hours of herself for them, stored them for a bad day. Now, the bad day had come early. She didn't tell Arlen. He was humming again, drawing figures in the dust with his fingertip. Birds. Mostly. Always birds. He looked at her with clear eyes. "Can we go back to the garden someday?" She smiled. "Maybe," she said, "if the snow ever melts." He nodded. "And I can build the bee house again. But bigger?" "Twice as big," she promised. He didn't ask why she wasn't eating. He'd stopped asking. He just accepted her stories, her reasons, her silence, and that somehow hurt more. That evening, she went to the boiler hallway again. The soldier wasn't there, just the pipe humming, the lights buzzing overhead, the smell of oil and something else, something fouler, something burnt. She waited anyway. 5 minutes, 10, maybe longer. Finally, a voice from behind her. "Looking for someone?" She turned. A different man, not a soldier, just a man in a guard's coat, eyes bloodshot and teeth yellow. He stepped closer. "Word travels," he said. "You looking to make another trade?" Aaliyah didn't move. She hated herself for what came next. But she nodded. He laughed, low, mean, amused. "I'll give you 2 pieces." It was rougher this time. He didn't bother with kindness, didn't bother hiding, just pulled her into the corner and took what he wanted. She bit her lip until it bled. He dropped the bread at her feet when he was done. 2 pieces, as promised. One crushed, one still warm. She picked them up with trembling fingers. Didn't look back. Didn't look up. Just walked. When she returned, Arlen was asleep. She broke the bread into tiny pieces, placed half beneath his blanket for morning, then gently fed him a bite at a time. He smiled between chews. "Mama," he said sleepily, "why does it always taste better when you give it to me?" She brushed the hair from his eyes. "Because you're the one who deserves it." His eyelids fluttered. "You're the best, Mom." And then he was gone again. Swallowed by sleep, she sat for hours beside him, not moving, just breathing through the ache in her legs, the bruise spreading across her ribs, the salt drying on her lips. She could still taste the metal of her own blood. She could still smell the sweat from the man's collar. But none of it mattered, because Arlen had eaten, because he was still alive, and that was all the world could ask of her now. Later that night, she took one of Arlen's paper birds, the one with the broken wing, and placed it in the hollow behind the brick where the bread had been stolen. Just a bird? Just paper? But maybe someone would find it. Maybe someone would understand. Or maybe it would just turn to ash. Either way, she had given, she had endured, and she would again. The body learns to forget. After a while, pain no longer feels like a warning. It becomes something else, static, a low hum you carry in your limbs. Shame, too, loses its shape. It no longer burns. It just lingers, like smoke in the hair of someone who's already left the fire. Aaliyah moved slower now. Her steps dragged slightly, her back curled forward when she sat. She hadn't bled in weeks. Her breath came with a soft whistle, especially when she stood too fast. But Arlen smiled every morning. That was the currency she lived on now. A boy's smile bought with broken skin. One day, he handed her a drawing. A child's sketch, wobbly lines, uneven shading. It was her. Not as she looked now, but as he remembered, standing in their old garden, a crooked pear tree behind her. Sun scribbled over her head. "You look happy," he said. She didn't trust her voice, so she nodded. "I want to go back there one day," he added. She swallowed. "We will," she lied, and hated herself for how easy it had become. That evening, the guard from before found her again. Not in the hall, at her cot. He stood above her, one boot tapping. She looked up slowly, shielding Arlen's face with her body. "You didn't come last night," he said. She didn't answer. He reached into his coat, dropped something on the floor. Bread. This time, with mold spotting one side. He bent down, just enough to whisper, "Don't make me come looking again," then walked away. Arlen stirred. "Mama, who was that?" "No one," she said, but her hands were shaking. Later, she scrubbed the bread clean with the edge of her sleeve, cut off the spotted part, fed the rest to Arlen while he curled in her lap. He chewed slowly. "Will we always be here?" he asked. "No," she said. "One day, this will just be a story we survived." He smiled again. "I'll draw it all, even the hard parts." She nodded. Good. Someone should remember. That night, she dreamed of the garden again. But this time, it was different. Overgrown, the tree had fallen, the bees were gone, and in the dirt, where the pear tree had been, there was something else, a bundle, wrapped in cloth, still, heavy. She reached for it, but woke up before she could see what was inside. When she rose, the bruises on her hips had darkened. She couldn't stretch her legs without wincing. Her fingers had started to swell. But Arlen was humming again, cutting paper shapes with a piece of sharpened plastic. Little birds, a tree, a circle she said was the sun. He handed her one. "This is us," he said. She unfolded it. 2 stick figures, one taller, one small, holding hands. She held it to her chest and wept silently for the first time in weeks, because the world had taken everything from her. But not him. Not yet. Not today. And if that meant disappearing one piece at a time, then she would vanish gladly. The first time she collapsed, it didn't feel like falling. It felt like forgetting, like her body had stepped away before her mind could follow. One moment she was standing at the water basin, rinsing Arlen's scarf. The next, the world tilted, and her knees hit concrete. She didn't feel the pain, only the stillness after. Someone called her name, not loud, not urgent, just enough to pull her back. It was Mira again, the older woman. She knelt beside Aaliyah, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Lie still," she said. Aaliyah tried to speak, but no words came. Her lips moved, her throat caught. Mira brought a damp cloth to her forehead. "You've been starving too long." Aaliyah shook her head weakly. "I'm fine." "You're dying." That night, Mira brought soup. Where she got it, Aaliyah didn't know, didn't ask. But the smell hit her like a wave, her stomach clenching, her mouth filling with water she couldn't swallow. "Eat," Mira said. Aaliyah pushed the bowl away. "Give it to him. He's asleep." Still, Mira didn't move. "You're no use to him dead," she said flatly. Aaliyah stared at the bowl. The broth was thin, barely colored, but there were slivers of something floating. Roots? Meat? She couldn't tell. It didn't matter. Her hands trembled as she picked up the spoon. She took one bite, then another, then stopped. The taste was too much, too real. Her stomach twisted in protest, her eyes blurred. But she ate half, forced herself, not because she wanted to live, but because Arlen needed someone who could stand upright tomorrow. She slept badly, dreams twisted, hands reaching, bread falling apart in her fingers, Arlen calling her name from somewhere far, where she couldn't follow. She woke cold and drenched in sweat, but upright, barely. In the days that followed, she didn't return to the boiler hall, not because she had decided to stop, but because her body wouldn't let her. Her limbs moved slower, her breath shortened, her vision sometimes throbbed at the edges. She still fed Arlen, scraps from others, Mira's soup. Once, a smuggled tin of beans someone dropped and didn't notice. She shared none of it with herself. He never noticed, or if he did, he never said. He just leaned into her a little harder when he fell asleep. She let him, because this was the only warmth she still had. Then came the list. A new evacuation plan, a northern route, risky, unstable, maybe impassable by week's end. Names were being taken. Not requests, just selections. Aaliyah's wasn't called. Neither was Arlen's. She watched as others packed what little they had, threadbare clothes, tin cups, letters never sent. One woman wept, one man laughed. Aaliyah stood silently in the corner, her hand resting on Arlen's back. He was sketching again. This time, a tunnel. 2 people walking toward light. She wanted to tell him it was a good drawing. Instead, she turned away. Because the light wasn't for them. Not anymore. That night, Mira sat beside her. "You should go," she said. Aaliyah stared at the floor. "I can't." "You can." Aaliyah shook her head. "There's only space for one." Mira looked over at Arlen, already asleep, his arm wrapped around his sketchbook. "I wasn't talking about you." The tunnel was real. A maintenance shaft carved behind a rusted panel near the back wall. Mira had found it weeks ago, kept it secret, said it was too unstable, too narrow, said if anyone tried it in groups, the whole thing might collapse. But now there was a chance. One person, small, quiet, fast. Arlen. They waited until the shelter dimmed, until the lights buzzed into silence and the corridors went soft with sleep. Aaliyah dressed Arlen gently, layering his coat over 2 sweaters, pulling socks over socks, wrapping the scarf she had knitted from old sleeves around his neck. He stirred. "What are we doing?" "We're going to play a game," she whispered. "What kind of game?" "You're going to be a sparrow." His face lit up. "The flying kind?" She nodded. "The quiet kind. The kind that slips through cracks." He looked down at his sketchbook. "Can I bring this?" "No," she said softly. "It'll be too heavy, but I'll keep it safe for you. I promise." At the panel, Mira waited. She had a rope, a flashlight with a weak battery, and a note tucked inside her coat, directions for whoever might find him on the other side. A contact, a name. "The way opens near the North Fields," Mira whispered. "A checkpoint that's been abandoned, if the snow hasn't buried it yet." She didn't finish the sentence. Arlen looked up at them both. "Will Mama come behind me?" Aaliyah knelt, took his small hands in hers. "No," she said. "I need to stay, to help someone else find their way." He frowned. "But you're always with me." She smiled. "And I will be, right here." She tapped the space over his heart. "Every time you breathe, I'm with you." He blinked fast, bit his lower lip. She leaned forward, kissed his forehead, then pulled a strip of cloth from her coat pocket, a small woven patch from the old pear tree garden quilt. "This will keep you warm," she said, tucking it into his mitten, "and remind you where you came from." Arlen nodded, still unsure, still trusting. The panel opened with a low groan. Cold air poured through. Mira helped him through first, sliding him into the tunnel, flashlight flickering, rope clipped to his belt. Aaliyah stood at the edge, knees trembling. She couldn't see his face anymore, only the back of his coat, his little boots. One step, then another. Before he disappeared into the dark, he turned. "Mama?" She swallowed. "Yes? I'll draw it all when I get there." She smiled through everything breaking. "Draw the sky first," she said. "That way, you'll never forget it's there." Then he was gone. The panel shut. Aaliyah dropped to her knees, hands clenched, breathing shallow. No tears. Not yet. Only the echo of footsteps. Only silence. Only the part of her that had just left and would never return. Mira rested a hand on her back. "You did the hardest thing." "No," Aaliyah whispered. "I didn't follow." The hours after the panel closed stretched like wire. Aaliyah sat with her back to the wall, palms flat against the concrete that separated her from the maintenance tunnel. She tried to feel vibrations, footsteps, scraping, anything, but the stone gave her nothing. Only cold. Only the echo of empty space where her son had crawled away. Mira stayed beside her until the generator cycled, then slipped off to keep watch. "If anyone asks," she whispered, "you were helping me with water." Aaliyah nodded without lifting her head. She counted breaths. Not hers, his. The rhythm she remembered from nights when fever rattled his ribs. Inhale, 2, 3. Exhale, 2. She rocked to that phantom tempo until the ache in her chest dulled. Somewhere down the corridor, metal clanged. Voices rose, then died. Life went on inside the shelter. Rations, arguments, sleep. The world does not pause for one mother's breaking. The first whisper reached her through the vent above the pipe bed. "Kid got through." "Not ours." Had cloth tied to his wrist, green? Aaliyah froze. Green? The patch she'd tucked into Arlen's mitten wasn't green. It was faded olive, threaded through with brown from the pear tree quilt. Could that sound like green to someone who didn't know? She pressed her ear to the grate, but the voices moved on, swallowed by the labyrinth of ducks. Hope arrived like frostbite, numb, then burning. Later, as the shelter dimmed, a woman Aaliyah barely knew crouched near her corner, gaunt, eyes cracked red with lack of sleep. She leaned close enough that Aaliyah smelled smoke on her hair. "You're Aaliyah," the woman whispered. Aaliyah stiffened. "Who told you that?" "Mira. She said if I heard anything from the North Run, I'd tell you first." The woman glanced over her shoulder. "A boy came through the culvert last night. Small, coat 2 sizes big, cloth strip on his wrist. Said his mother taught him about sparrows." Aaliyah's heart slammed. "Is he alive when they pulled him out?" the woman said. "Convoy medic took him. That's all I heard." Aaliyah grabbed her hand. "Thank you." The woman shook her head. "Don't thank me. My little girl didn't fit the shaft. I couldn't send her." Her voice cracked. "If yours makes it, remember mine." Aaliyah squeezed her fingers, hard. "I will." The stranger slipped away, leaving the smell of ash and the taste of salt on the air. Aaliyah didn't sleep that night. Instead, she laid the pear-cloth twin, the piece she'd kept, flat across her lap and began to stitch. With thread unraveled from Arlen's torn sock, she sewed the outline of a sparrow. Crooked, messy, real. Every pull of thread said, "Keep flying." Every knot said, "Stay warm." Every stitch said the words she wasn't allowed to speak aloud in case hope shattered under them. At ration time, she surprised herself. She took her portion. Not to eat, to divide. She broke the crust into 4 slivers and slid them, casual, unseen, to the boy with no spoon, the girl who coughed blood, the woman who had told her the news. And Mira. Someone saw, someone always sees, but no one stopped her, because there is a moment after loss when you either close your fist or open it wider. Aaliyah opened hers. Toward morning, the guard who had taken from her before passed down the aisle. He paused, waiting for her to rise and follow. She didn't move. He waited longer. Finally, "You owe..." She looked up, met his eyes, really met them. "No," she said, voice steady. "Debts paid?" Maybe it was her tone. Maybe he was tired. Maybe mercy, thin as it was, still flickered in him. He walked on. When the lights buzzed awake, Mira returned with a scrap of news scribbled in pencil on cloth. En pass cleared. Child moved med truck. Name unknown. Aaliyah pressed the message to her lips. Not proof, not safety, not happily ever, but possibility. And in a world stripped to barter and bone, possibility was the closest thing to grace she'd ever hold. She folded the cloth, slid it between the pages of Arlen's sketchbook. On the inside cover, she wrote one line. "If you find this and you remember sparrows, you were loved beyond hunger." The shelter began to empty, not all at once, and not with ceremony, just slow disappearances. A bunk abandoned here, a child gone by morning, no announcements, no names, just fewer footsteps, fewer eyes, and with each absence, the walls seemed to sigh. The war outside was shifting. Someone said, another front opening, drawing soldiers north. That meant supply trucks would stop coming. That meant time was running out. For most, it meant escape. For Aaliyah, it meant silence. She no longer woke to Arlen's breathing, but she still turned toward where he used to sleep. Her arm would reach in the dark, brush empty cloth. Each time, she had to remember, he's gone, he's gone, he's gone, but maybe not lost. She whispered to herself in the mornings, fingers wrapped around the sketchbook he left behind. Still breathing, it was enough. One evening, Mira didn't return. Aaliyah waited. She rationed the soup. She rewound the thread in preparation to fix the seam on Mira's coat. But the bed remained cold. She asked around. No one had seen her. By the next day, a new name was added to the list on the wall. Mira, presumed gone. They always wrote gone, not dead. Hope had become a form of policy, a lie that kept people still. Aaliyah didn't cross the name out. She just folded the last spoonful of soup into a cloth and left it on Mira's bunk. She returned the next morning. It was untouched. She drew again, not beautifully, just clearly. Hands, always hands. A pear passing a piece of bread, another pressed against frost-covered glass, a hand shielding a child's face, a hand letting go. Then, at the very end of the notebook, a final sketch. A woman walking into snow. Behind her, a trail of crumbs. She labeled nothing, but anyone who saw it would understand she had fed him the path out, even if it starved her to do it. The soldier with the yellow boots approached her again. "You're still here?" he said, voice almost curious. She looked up from her drawing. "Where else would I be?" He shifted his weight, looked down at the paper, at the quiet woman with ink-stained fingers and bruises hidden under sleeves. "You missed your chance," he said. "All the convoys are gone now." She nodded. "Good." "Good?" She looked him in the eye. "If I'd gone, someone else's child wouldn't have..." He scoffed, shook his head, walked away. But he didn't take anything from her this time. Not a word, not a glance, not a body. Later, a girl, thin, no older than 16, sat beside her. "Is it true," she asked, "that you gave everything away?" Aaliyah smiled. "No, I kept the most important thing." "What's that?" Aaliyah tapped the book in her lap. "A name?" The girl looked confused. "Your name?" Aaliyah shook her head. "His..." That night, she stood near the shelter's outer gate for the first time in days. Snow drifted down, soundless. She took a strip of Mira's scarf and tied it to the railing. It fluttered in the wind, faded blue and frayed at the ends. Then she opened her coat and added something else. A tiny paper bird. Arlen's. Folded by his hands, saved by hers. She pressed it gently into the crack between the bricks and whispered, "Fly far, little one," then turned back into the dark, still hungry, still alone, but whole, because someone, somewhere, was still drawing sparrows, and maybe someday he'd remember who showed him how. She died without an audience, not dramatically, not loudly, not even suddenly, just slowly, like a candle flickering out in an abandoned room, one breath shorter than the last, one moment when the silence didn't lift, one final thought she couldn't finish. And when someone found her, days later, maybe, they didn't know her name. They didn't ask. She was just another woman curled in a corner of the shelter, a coat pulled too tight, eyes closed as if still dreaming of something better. But near her hand was a notebook, and someone opened it. Inside, sketches. Not perfect, not practiced, but real. Hands passing bread, a child holding a bird, a woman pressing her palm against glass, a scarf tied to a tree, and at the end, a note, tucked into the back cover, scrawled in uneven letters. "My dear child, if you're reading this, you made it. That's all I ever hoped for. I didn't abandon you. I just knew if I stayed with you, you'd never leave. And if you stayed, you'd never survive. I wasn't strong enough to protect you, but I was just strong enough to let you go. If someday you hold a child of your own, and they ask what love looks like, show them this book. Show them what I gave. Tell them it cost everything, but it was never a sacrifice. It was a gift. And if they ask where I went, tell them I became the hunger that taught you compassion. The voice that taught you silence can be full of love. The shadow that fed you and never asked to be seen. You don't need to forgive me. You only need to live. That will be enough." The child who found the book, years later, now grown, held it in her lap by firelight. She had never met Aaliyah, but she remembered the drawing. She had seen it once, decades ago, in the hands of a refugee boy with soft eyes and ink-stained fingers. He had told her, quietly, "My mother taught me to draw birds, but I think what she really wanted me to do was remember." The girl smiled, tore out one page, folded it, slid it into her coat, then added her own sketch, a woman in a garden, arms outstretched, a sparrow on her shoulder, a child laughing in the background. No one knew her name, but they knew what she gave, and that, in a world rebuilt on ashes, was enough. Voiceover. No one remembered her face, but someone remembered her hands, the way they trembled when passing a crumb, the way they never reached for anything except someone else's hunger. And in a world that had forgotten how to be human, she remembered. Final visual: a snowy field, a scarf fluttering on a branch, a sketchbook left beneath it. Open to the final page, a mother walking into winter, carrying no food, only hope. Final whisper: I don't need forgiveness, I just hope, in some dream, my child runs into my arms and says, Mom, you did the right thing. Fade to black, the faint sound of a child laughing, wind stirring through frost-covered trees. If this story touched something deep in you, don't keep it to yourself. There are stories we carry alone for too long, about love that cost everything, about sacrifices we never speak of, about choices that hurt even when they save someone else. This space was made for those stories, for those feelings, for people like you. Leave a comment. Tell us what moved you. Tell us what stayed with you. Or just whisper back, I would have done the same. If you want more stories that don't shy away from pain, but still believe in beauty, subscribe. We share these not to break you, but to remind you that you're not broken. You're just one of the ones who still feels. And that's a kind of survival, too.